There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Rational Standard. I haven't been on in a week, so it's good to be back. But yeah, let's get right into it. If you think about all the problems that South Africa has, what really comes to mind first? Well, of course. I mean, was there any doubt? Gambling, specifically online gambling. That's the big crisis of our time. So much so that Pick and Pay CEO Sean Summers says that the online gambling industry is out of control and that there should be a complete ban on ads and marketing for online gambling, poker, roulette, slots, what have you. And one of the reasons for this, of course, is that South Africans are kind of increasingly desperate, and they don't have a lot of money, and now they're splurging this on online gambling because, of course, and none of us should ever be allowed to forget this. South Africans are all children. It doesn't matter if you're 18 or 30 or 60. You are a child, perpetually cradle to grave. You're a kid. So that is what Sean Summers says, and that comes hot on the heels. This was all reported 2 days ago, 29th of October. This was right around the time that apparently a case was in the Supreme Court of Appeal that was about interpreting the Gauteng Gambling Act. In South Africa, gambling is regulated both on a national and a provincial level. The national government has deferred mainly to the provinces. So the Supreme Court of Appeal had to interpret the Gauteng Gambling Act, where online betting, I'm probably going to butcher this, but online betting companies have found a loophole to kind of weasel in other kinds of gambling, kind of in addition to that narrow kind of gambling that they were allowed to do. And the Supreme Court of Appeal agreed with the National Gambling Board to say that no, it's illegal. You can't use this loophole. So specifically, roulette, I believe, is now an unlawful form of gambling in Gauteng, but the National Gambling Board, roulette online gambling, I should say, and the National Gambling Board now believes that this means it's unlawful across the country. Lawyers have obviously disagreed and said, no, it's only a narrow interpretation of the Gauteng Act, but that's all details. The fact is that there seems to be some kind of concerted effort now, both from civil society and from the state, to tackle the scourge of online gambling. And I find that very bizarre personally. I think this is yet another example of the state kind of and busybodies from civil society thinking that they know best. I've never gambled. I don't gamble. That doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter that I don't gamble or that I don't like gambling. If other people want to do that with their own money, that is entirely up to them. So yeah, that's our first topic for today. And Ayanda, I think let's start with you. What's your kind of insights and your thoughts about this circus that's emerging?
Well, yeah. Thanks, Martin, for that introduction. I think I I I I have gambled before, but of course I don't gamble anymore. I think I lost too much money. I used to gamble on football. But the one thing I can tell you about gambling, as a former gambler myself, is that if you if you want to stop gambling because you feel like you're wasting your money, you can. You completely have the control to actually stop gambling. So this idea that you can't stop. I don't agree with it. But let's take this back a bit, because there's context to this. So before you even have Pick and Pay speaking out about it and other people in civil society, you've had Rise Mzansi now for at least a good year. They've been running a public advocacy campaign against gambling, and they've been framing it around the same issue, saying that this is a predatory industry that is targeting poor people in the country who are desperate, who are looking for a means to generate income. And in the main, it really has been their member of parliament, Makashule Ghana, who in fact today, if I'm not wrong, is going to be having a debate with other members of parliament around this issue of gambling. So this anti-gambling crusade that you're seeing now in recent weeks, really, I would I would attribute it in part to Rise Mzansi, but in the main, I would attribute it to someone known as Koshik Karan, who is a very famous entrepreneur in South Africa. I happen to follow him on LinkedIn and on X as well. And this guy is a banker. He believes in financial freedom and all these things that he tweets about. So it has been quite interesting to see him being at the forefront of this anti-gambling crusade. But I would say for the past 2 or 3 weeks, he has been tweeting frequently about this thing. Again, people are losing money, students are gambling their allowances, people are sinking into debt. So we've sort of been using this framing again that this industry is responsible for all these issues, it's responsible for why people are losing their money, right? And the reaction to those tweets, of course, has been massive. People are in the comments crying out, we're losing money, this industry is evil and everything. Just the other day, he made a post about how he believes many gamblers in the country also fund political parties as well. They are involved in these brand partnerships with celebrities and everything. So his argument is there's no incentive on the side of politicians and those who are celebrities as well to also tackle the issue because they're all benefiting from it somehow financially. But the point I'm getting at here is that he has also been running his own sort of campaign against this, and it has really been responsible for much of the reaction that you've seen. So what happened a while back is that he wrote a petition. He wants to make a submission to the National Assembly, and he sort of created this petition online that he asked many people to sign of amendments that he believes should be made to the remote gambling bill. It's essentially a link that he made, and he said, "Guys, please just sign this, when we can make this submission to Parliament." And so I had an opportunity to go through it and to see it as well. And as I told you, Martin, earlier on, I mean, there's around 16 or 17 like proposals that he makes in total, but I won't go into some of them. But some of them, for example, like the one I spoke about of saying the legal gambling age in the country should be set at 21. There's one that says there should be limits on gambling. I think people must be allowed to gamble once or twice a week in some cases. There's another one that says on these gambling apps, you must have limits in terms of how many attempts you have. So maybe you'll have four limits. Once you've gambled for 4 times or you've attempted 4 times, the app automatically locks you out. There's one about advertising saying you must limit advertising to between 9 p.m. at night and 6 a.m. in the morning. You must ban, advertising on sports broadcasts. There's so many draconian, proposals that he makes in the thing, and I think it's very interesting for people to go into it, right? And then also, what you now have later this week is the National Gambling Board as well, saying this is a crisis. Gambling is a crisis in South Africa. It's destabilizing families and communities, and government needs to intervene and try and address the problem. And they're more or less saying the same thing. And really, the kind of reforms that they're pushing for, they're also pushing for a legal age of gambling to be set, and they're placing it at 25, which is even more shocking, really. They're saying that the legal age must be at 25, and they're also saying that in terms of advertising, there must be a serious crackdown on that as well. They're talking about a partial ban for advertising, not even certain times. They're just saying a partial ban on it, sports broadcasting as well. So that really is the essence of what has been going on. Many of them are framing it around people who are who are disadvantaged socioeconomically, and they are being taken advantage of by this industry which is preying on them. And really, my 2 cents around that, again, are simple. The main problem that I have with this anti-gambling crusade is that it is suggesting that the gambling industry should bear some degree of responsibility for the problem. That is the essence of what is being said. They're saying that we need to regulate this industry because it is responsible. So you're basically blaming the industry itself. And in my view, that kind of reasoning or that kind of argument is incorrect, and it cannot be applied consistently. Because if you are saying that the industry itself is responsible for the problem and not people who use their own money to gamble, then you must be able to apply that logic consistently. You must be able to say that, for example, a company like Coca-Cola, which sells sugary beverages, you must be able to argue that it is responsible for the high consumption of sugar in South Africa, for instance. You must blame them and you must go and crack down on them and say that, oh, because you guys are responsible for the consumption of sugar, through your relentless advertising, we must crack down on you, not allow you to advertise your products, not allow you to promote them or to engage in all these sponsorships and partnerships. But that is not going to happen because people understand that sugar consumption has to do with personal choice. It is people who make the conscious decision to consume sugar in society. No one coerces you or compels you um, to consume sugar. So even though there is a difference, of course, between sugar and gambling, the point I'm getting at here is that if you accept with sugar consumption that it is individuals who are responsible, they have agency, they consume sugar, then you have to necessarily accept with gambling as well that you cannot blame the industry itself. You have to blame individuals who engage in gambling. And the problem with this kind of state control that we're seeing, the state expanding its control and trying to micromanage people's behavior, is it is a very dangerous chain that we've seen with the tobacco bill as well. The EFF has proposed amendments to the liquor bill as well. They want liquor advertising to be banned in the country. The problem with this trend that you're seeing is it's a slippery slope. Once you allow the state to micromanage people's behavior in one area, inevitably it's going to expand its control in other areas. So as we're seeing now with tobacco, and as we're seeing as well um, with alcohol. So there is a need to emphasize that at the end of the day, what we're dealing with here is personal choice. Gambling, I would argue, is a vice, much like smoking and drinking. People can overindulge, and there can be negative consequences. People can lose money, they can fall into debt, and all these bad things can happen. But what you must emphasize again at the end of the day is that people have agency and that they make the decision to use their own money to gamble. Advertising can heighten temptation, it can trigger people's impulses, but it doesn't erase their agency at the end of the day. It is them who make that conscious decision to really gamble and to spend their money. As I said earlier on, there is no external force that pulls you, or some supernatural force that pulls you and forces you really to gamble your own money. So we need to keep emphasizing this notion of personal choice and how people must be held responsible for their own choices. But the last point that I do want to make is that what people are calling the gambling crisis is in fact not a gambling crisis. It is a reflection of a much deeper crisis in the country, and that is a socioeconomic crisis where we have millions of people who are unemployed, who aren't participating in the economy and are looking for a way to generate income. And naturally, gambling has created some kind of avenue to that. So even if you are going to succeed in pushing through these draconian regulations and everything, another argument I want to make is you will not succeed in reducing gambling, because what people are trying to do at the end of the day is to generate income. It's to make money. They have no source of income. So the deeper problem you need to deal with in South Africa is the socioeconomic crisis. How do we create employment? How do we actually absorb people into the economy? So they have more sustainable ways of generating income, and not gambling, which is by its nature a game of probability. You can either win or lose. There is no guarantee that you will win money when you gamble. So it is about creating sustainable employment opportunities, growing the economy, and ensuring that people have ways to make a living without having to engage in all these risky things like gambling. But really, at the end of the day, trying to push through all these draconian regulations without appreciating the deeper crisis and the fact that at the end of the day, it is people who make these decisions, I think, in my view, is not constructive. It isn't helpful. We are better off trying to address the deeper drivers, and also reminding people that at the end of the day, it is people really who have agency. And if we're going to argue with gambling, um, that the industry itself is responsible and not individuals, we're going to have to apply that in every other sphere of society, and we won't be able to, because that kind of logic is inconsistent. It's incoherent, and it can't be applied consistently.
Mm, Absolutely. Well said. I have a lot to say about that as well. But Jakes, over to you first.
Yeah. I mean, I think really that touched on the main thrust, right, of the argument against that. I wouldn't know, right, with the latter part about the impulses around or behind gambling. Consequentialist arguments are always problematic like that, right? Because the United States too also has large percentage of its people who gamble, and they have much more better economic prospects than we do. So like it would be interesting though, right, to see the share, like the comparison. It is something interesting to think about what motivates people to take the actions that they do, right? But I don't think, as I said, for us to have stronger arguments, the consequentialist arguments are just, that type of way. But the main point that Umakeba was making, I agree with fully. Like it is, he mentioned that all of these things are vices. And I think two things can be correct at the same time, right? If we were to stillman, right, the intentions behind the people who want to regulate gambling or anything else like that. And this for me is an argument that I love in like another area, like free speech and everything, that nothing can make people take actions that they otherwise would not want to take in it. But that is a topic for another day. But either way, I love this logic. But if we were to still man the people who argue against things like the predatory practices of gambling companies, it would be that they come from a place of seeing the consequences, the harmful effects that this is having, as you all have mentioned, right? And we're like that is true, right? We can agree, as everyone has said, that smoking, when abused in general, really harmful, right? Alcohol consumption and abuse too, also harmful. All of these vices, right? Vices are vices for reasons, because any long-term use of them is harmful. That is, I don't think, something that can be debated, but it is like the nature of where the harm is directed, which really, for a legal scholar like myself, is something that is of interest. Why Lysander Spooner's essay is so amazing, right? Like if you own yourself, then you can harm yourself. These are the implications of liberty. And just because you are harming yourself, it does not then create a basis for the state to act on you in the same manner that there's a basis for the state to act upon you if you are harming someone else, right? If you're violating someone else's rights, then it's like, now you are doing something that you should not be doing. So I think this is a point that like really should, that undergirds a lot of the regulation, as mentioned in a lot of other areas of society. Smoking, alcohol consumption, these are things that are already heavily regulated, right? You see also South Africa is one of the few, or at least was one of the few countries that instituted a sugar tax, right? And we have a sugar cane industry in South Africa, and our government thought that it was a great idea to institute a tax on sugar and sugary products, right? And I guess the results of the sugarcane industry in KZN are testament to really the consequences of a policy like that, because that industry has been battered by problems. And I won't say that that was the cause of the problems, but the tax definitely did not help. So this is something that really undergirds a lot of rationale, really, when it comes to general state intervention. And it is pretty unfortunate because, beyond everything else, it is a fundamental denial of choice, right? Of agency, of the ability of human beings to direct their lives for better or for worse, right? Even if you do want, like, the reason we all want a good society, all want a society where people aren't spending their hard-earned money if they don't have a lot of disposable income on gambling. We don't want a society of addicts and all of these things. At least I would say that I don't want that. But the impulse of me not wanting that is that I genuinely don't want it. I don't want that because people are scared to do that lest they be locked in jail. Yes, so they do it in the in hidden places, in much more danger places. I want society to fundamentally choose not to gamble, right? Like the option should be there, but it should not be something that is pursued, because we have made like all these civic society organizations. I'm like, man, there's so much work to do, like actually do the work of going to a super pet store and sitting there with all of the men with their long sleeves and like talking to them and saying, maybe don't do that. Like, spend the money you spend lobbying and throwing these events for the states to try to get them to pass legislation that makes it illegal, and actually trying to help these individuals, make the case to them, show them if that is the truth. And I think it should be much more, at least easier, to make a case against something if it is is true, that truly it is harmful, right? So I'm like, yeah, man, it is an unfortunate state of the world, right? Before the pod, we were talking about how the world is crazy, and I think, you know, statist interventionism really has been accelerating if you just look at the general trajectory of the world, and so things like these are normalized, right? Like regulation is normalized, the regulation of vices in general are normalized, and except in a few, you know, cases like in like some European countries in Portugal or something when it concerns drugs. But yeah, so really it is the normalization and the denial of people's agency, which is pretty saddening. The more I'm talking, the more I'm like kind of getting a bit melancholic, because I'm like, man, the undercurrent, the philosophical undercurrent of things like these is that people fundamentally do not have an ability to act in their self-interest. And even if you say that is the truth, it's like, then what do you do? Do you act on their behalf, and on what basis, right? Like, on what basis? What is this best self-interest? And all of these philosophical questions that should lead you to liberty, by the way. You know, the answer open-ended. The answer is that you let people be free because you cannot figure out their lives for them. And yeah, the government won't stop. If the National Gambling Board is also moving in that direction, then they won't stop. I'm glad that it was the Gauteng Gambling Board, which really I would say is not the best gambling board in the country. Most gambling companies are registered under the Western Cape Gambling Board, I think. So, you know, shout out, shout out. I hope the Western Cape Gambling Board does not interpret the SCA judgment in that manner. And, you know, industry is allowed to thrive. The implications, right, the consequences of this are pretty major. Right, gambling companies are intertwined with the fabric of sports, and if this proposed, you know, amendment is passed, then, you know, revenue streams, contracts that have been signed under a different context will now have to be relooked, because a lot of the behavior, like, you know, a huge part of why any gambling company would sponsor any sports league, any sports team, is for the advertisement. And if that would be banned in sports in general, then it means that the contract is invalidated. The implications of that for all the people employed in those industries will be, you know, pretty major. So I guess to Martin's point, out of all the problems that we do have in South Africa, right, I don't think that the average the average person who lives in, you know, in Johannesburg and who doesn't have water like half the fucking time. So I don't think I'm thinking about, you know, whether gambling regulation is the thing that needs to be sorted out first, man. Like, yeah, it is pretty low down my list of priorities of what the state should be doing. But again, from their side, I understand the gambling board exists. You know, this is what they're supposed to do according to their legislation. So I guess they're just doing their job. I just think, yeah, this is why we argue for smaller government, so we eliminate all of these
Mm,
things.
mm. Absolutely, well said. I think our job is to make sure that they are unable to do their job, at least without kind of a lot of kind of friction. So
Mhm.
it's nice that they think they're doing their jobs, but our job is very self-consciously is to make sure that they struggle to do that. So yeah, totally agreed. So yeah, I mean, Ayanda, you mentioned it's a slippery slope, and I've also made this point on tobacco a lot of times. But I think we all need to realize that we're already on the slope. The principle has already been conceded long ago, long before any of the three of us kind of started kind of doing work in this industry. Long ago, it was decided that the state must protect us from our own vices. Um, and what we're doing with this gambling kind of push against gambling is we're adding more lubricant to the slope, and that's what we're trying to stop, is to stop adding more lubricant so that we don't keep slipping. Let's actually turn around and try to climb the slope back. That's what needs to start happening on tobacco, on consumer choice, certainly on gambling, because if we carry on the slope, nothing of human freedom remains. I mean, it goes directly to totalitarianism. It's not the slippery slope fallacy. It literally goes directly to totalitarianism. The idea that it doesn't matter that you've now turned 18 and you're now an adult, that is actually, it's just a detail. It doesn't matter. Like, you are still making choices that we as the political elite don't like, and therefore we will legislate against it, we will regulate against it, and therefore your new status as a major, as an adult, is actually completely irrelevant. So it will be cradle to grave coddling. The state is our parent, and it will decide what is good for us, what is virtuous, what is vice, and that is the embodiment of totalitarianism. Even if you dress it up in democratic vibes, a book that I can really recommend. It's a very old book, but it's one of the most insightful books that I've started reading. I'm not through it yet. Is Jacob Tellman's The Origins of Totalitarian Democracy. And there he takes kind of this insidious idea. It's kind of from the pioneers of the French Revolution, the kind of the first proto-communists who kind of started with this idea of marrying totalitarianism with democratic principle. And I think that's far more insidious than other forms of totalitarianism. So apparently people are voting and countenancing this mandate to cut gambling, to cut smoking, to cut drinking, to cut sugar, eventually to cut meat and so on. So it's okay. Since there was a vote, it's okay. So we need to be very careful about that. But I think the other point to make is that gambling is a completely normal part of life. Like if you are a fee-paying member of the EFF, for instance, you give 100 rand to the EFF every month, you are gambling. You are saying, I am giving the party money in the expectation and the hope that it will take over the reins of power and that it will govern in line with what my political values are. Well, a presto, it didn't win the election, so now you've gambled, you've now lost your money. Like you've now lost the money, you've gambled, and it didn't happen. SARS in South Africa, paying taxes in South Africa is a gamble. We pay taxes in the perhaps naive expectation that there's going to be some kind of reciprocity, that we're going to get services, that the government is going to respect us as taxpayers. And that doesn't happen. Well, at least it doesn't happen nearly as much as I think we all agree it should. So whenever we pay money and the outcome for which we are paying is not guaranteed. Like if I buy a packet of chips at the store, I put the chips on the counter, I give the money, it is guaranteed that I'm getting the chips now. That's not gambling. It's a guaranteed transaction. But paying taxes, paying dues to a political party, sitting down and watching a movie on Netflix, that is a gamble. You pay for Netflix. You don't know if you're going to enjoy the movie. You've already paid the money. You're going to sit there for 2 hours watching a movie that is maybe cuck. You've now wasted 2 hours. You've paid a subscription. You could have been working for those 2 hours. You've wasted time, so you've wasted money. That is a gamble. That is just normal. That is life. So we've kind of carved out this arbitrary kind of exception for entertainment gambling, the direct kind of gambling where we put money in the slot machine and pull a handle. And again, there's no guarantee that you'll win. You might lose it all. But as if there's something inherently bad about that, but not inherently bad about paying 20% of your income over to SARS with the promise of getting something back, but actually that just being a gamble. So yes, people do lose money with gambling. The same with taxes, same with investing time. That is also money when you spend time on something that you might not have enjoyed. So we need to be very careful about this exceptionalization of this kind of recreational gambling. We need to understand that gambling is something that we all do in different ways every single day of our lives, and we would not want that to be regulated. Like that I mean, I just said it's the end of that road is totalitarianism. But if we really regulated gambling, like gambling is an important thing to regulate, that is real totalitarianism. That would be a real kind of crisis for humanity if we decided in principle that gambling was something to something inherently immoral and unethical that has to be stamped out. So we need to be very careful about that idea. Just on this as well, I think that the unspoken problem that comes from the government specifically on this is, and again, this thought was triggered by a post on X a few hours ago. It's the South African government Twitter account, and it said something like "Happy Friday, everyone! Remember, it's the weekend. Don't go and splurge your money. Spend wisely," and kind of that type of vibes. And it's like already people are saying, "How dare you? The audacity! The audacity! You come to us every month and you take a big chunk of our money that we labored hard for, and you go and you invest it in criminal enterprises, and now you have the audacity to come and tell us to spend the little that we have left after not just taxes have been deducted, but after the worsening economic conditions that come as a result of government intervention, as a result of that being deducted from our potential economic activity, you still have the audacity to tell us what to do with the little that we have left. So I mean, that's the real issue that leads to desperation, of the government saying, "Oh, people are desperate, they're poor, so now they're kind of gambling out the little money they have left." It's like, well, if you have an issue with them having a little money left, then maybe exempt them from your bloody taxes, like the VAT exempt a lot more products, reduce or heighten the income tax threshold, just to do something that makes it at least seem like you're somewhat aware of the fact that you as government are making South Africans poorer. Maybe that will be a more respectful thing to do. So in this whole debate, we must not lose sight of that. We are caught as South Africans in terrible economic circumstances, and the government is using that as a pretext to say, okay, but we have to regulate more because look at these poor sods, not getting by in a month. It's like no. Let's take a step back. Let's investigate our premises. Let's see if, in fact, you as the government can to do something in-house to make the lot that we have a little bit better. Yeah, I'm gonna give both of you, starting with Ayanda, another opportunity before we have to go on to our next topic. Ayanda.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Just three things I want to be very quick before we move to the next topic. The first is to say, well, I think it would be in their best interests as politicians not to go after the gambling industry, especially when they're getting money from gamblers. So if they don't want to close those taps, don't go after the gamblers. The second point that I want to make again, and I want to emphasize this again because I think this is where we lose each other in the debate. When we fight against regulations, there are people who interpret that as us somehow celebrating what's happening now and all the issues that people are facing. That isn't the case. We're not saying that gambling isn't a vice, as Zix has said. And we aren't saying that there aren't issues that are associated with overindulging in gambling. What is really being defended here, as Zix mentioned earlier on, is this idea of agency and that people do have the power to direct their choices and how they act. But my third point is perhaps a question to Zix. I don't know if he was disagreeing with me or not. Something about advertising and consumer behavior. And the question I want to pose to him is, does he think advertising does have an impact on consumer behavior? Does advertising shape consumer behavior or not? Because I think I was not clear on what he was saying there.
Six.
That's cool, right? Let me start with the question, Pumageba, because I think it's a nice nuanced one. Something I think a whole lot about. As I said, the line of argument is something I pursue in another strand of political thought, let's say. But yes and no. The no part is the assumption of saying that someone can be controlled, right? In your talking about it the first time, you mentioned something about how, like, advertising can influence someone to do something. It can play on their impulses, but generally that person still has agency. Even use yourself as an example, and I am fully on that side. That's why I said yes and no, right? Yes, in the sense that that is the intent behind advertising. It is meant to entice you. It is meant to want to influence you to do something. But ultimately, that is what it does. It does not control, it influences. And influence can be subverted because we all have agency. So yeah, I am on the side of having full agents. And I follow that train of thought, even in, like, as I said, in speech, why I am opposed to things like hate speech, because it operates on the very same premise like this, of saying that there are certain things that people can say that can control other people and make them do other things. And I'm like, no, that is an elimination of agency. They can try and influence them, but it does not control them, at least for the purposes of drawing a causal line between what an action taken by person A who had heard person B say something. I don't think person B and that action taken by person B, A, there's a causal line between that. But some people seem to think there is. That is why they want to regulate gambling and gambling advertising. But yeah, okay, I hope that answers your question, does it? Issue. Yeah. Then that was my thoughts on that. And then my final thoughts really on this, I think I've kind of explained it here on where I sit, right? People cannot be controlled. So don't try and control them. Don't try and you can try, right? You can succeed to various degrees, but it usually comes to a boiling point. So don't try and do that. From whatever side you may be coming at this from. And like, concerning the state, to Martin's point, we like, I think it's a very important point that we should emphasize, that we are already on the slope, right? Like, this is a slope that we're already on, and we are kind of fighting to walk up it again. And I think that, fighting things like this, like, the gambling regulation or any form of the tobacco bill, right? Things like any form of that is an inhibition that continues our march down the slope. I think we should definitely lean on that more. We should definitely fight it, even though some may think that it is not worth it. I definitely think it's worth it, because it cuts to the core of what it is really that we stand for, right? The ability, like, for people to have the latitude to take decisions, some of which may be very bad, I might add. But if they aren't harming anyone else but themselves, I don't think that the state, again, to sound like a broken record, should act upon them. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Six. I think that's a good point to end on, because in some places around the world, in fact, and this surprises me even, they are in fact walking back up the slope. It's not just a one-way street down the slope. I've known my whole life in South Africa only the one-way street down the slope. But earlier this week, I believe it was on Sunday, we got some very good news out of Argentina, where the political party of President Javier Milei there actually, this is a relative word, but swept the Argentinian legislative elections. So this is apparently, according to news reports from Argentina, the first time in at least, I think, since the 80s or something, that a governing party in Argentina has improved its chances in the midterms. This was a midterm election. So Malay's party, let me get the numbers here. It's called La Libertad Avanza. I believe that means something like forward to liberty, or liberty forward. Um, it secured 40.8% of the national vote. So just see that in context of only a portion of the seats in the Chamber of Deputies, that's their National Assembly, and a portion of the seats in the Senate, that's their National Council of Provinces. Only a portion of each was up for contestation, but it secured 40.8% of the vote. That is the amount of votes that the ANC secured in the last general election in South Africa, 40-ish, 41-ish percent. So that is not nothing. That's really, really something, and it's surprising for kind of, maybe it's less surprising to Argentinians who understand the dynamics of their politics, but to me it's surprising in the context of, in September, I believe, there was a provincial election in the capital province of Buenos Aires, which this party La Libertad Avanza lost quite handsomely. And that sent markets and so on into something of a panic to say, oh my goodness, this is a clear referendum on Javier Milei's austerity and deregulation agenda, and clearly the people of Argentina are against it. This is how localized elections are sometimes used around the world. And that is the impression that I got. That's the impression that a lot of people around the world got. That's the impression that Donald Trump also got. He spoke to Javier Milei and said that support for his party is contingent on him doing well in this past election, which now has happened. So this was surprising in that context, and it's a very, very welcome surprise. And according to David Ansara, one of our other regular guests, he wrote his column in the Common Sense this morning on that. So please go and view that. Now the La Libertad Avanza has 101 deputies in the Chamber of Deputies. It only had 37, so that's tripling their numbers. And they had 6 senators in the Senate. They have 20 now. And the key thing to understand from this, because it's still a minority, it's still a very comfortable minority that they have in the Senate and in the Chamber of Deputies, but they are now able to overrides of the presidential veto. So just to provide some context, Milei was elected without support in Congress, in the Argentine Congress, and therefore it meant that every time he vetoed some new spending bill by Parliament, by Congress, Congress could override him. They could say, okay, we note that you vetoed it, but we are now going to vote again at a higher rate, and therefore override your veto, and now the spending has to go forward. And that undermined his plans. But now, due to the increased minority that his party has, he can stop that. So now they cannot any longer, the Peronists cannot override his vetoes any longer. And that's a key change in the dynamics, I think, of Argentinian politics. So and then just kind of one headliner before I throw over to you guys. One of the first things that Milei did is he had a campaign promise. He reduced the size of their cabinet, the Argentine cabinet, and it was a cabinet of 18, and it was reduced to 9. So South Africa has a cabinet of 32 ministers and 37 deputy ministers. We've gone into that a few times, but I am just so happy now that a president who did that, a government that did that, I mean, that's huge. That's a massive reform, has now, in a democratic election, been given the thumbs up. I have my issues of democracy. I have big issues of democracy. But this shows me that sometimes, in fact, the liberal option, the real liberal option, not the milk toast kind of social democratic kind of pragmatic liberalism, real, call it libertarianism, actually does do well at the polls. And that is excellent news, and I hope to see a lot more of it. Ayanda, what's your thoughts?
First thing I'd like to say is I wish, I think, what's his name again? Richard Spoor, I think. He's an attorney, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. I wish he was here to hear me celebrating Milei's victory. He was one of the guys who was saying, "Oh, look at this guy. I mean, there's been a bit of an economic dip in the country, so his reforms aren't working anymore." And what he missed, Martin, is what you just explained now. That, of course, in September they did lose that key provincial election. So the markets were a bit jittery, there was some degree of uncertainty, and they weren't sure whether his reform agenda would survive politically. So that was to be expected. So the point you make is important, that the markets being jittery wasn't, sort of indicating that his reform agenda has failed. It was just, reflecting that climate of uncertainty and people not being sure that his reform agenda would survive. So I think the victory is important in the sense that it gives his campaign some momentum. It boosts him, so to speak. And this is something which David also highlighted in his very good column that he wrote in the Common Sense. Now this is now his second coming, and he actually has a mandate now. This is the other thing you mentioned, Martin, too, that there now is a mandate for this reform agenda. The fact that the people of Argentina are rallying behind him isn't something small. This is very important. As you've said, this is someone embarking on very pro-market reforms, and the victory shows that these reforms do have support, and people are backing him. But the one thing I'd really want to pivot to in this discussion about Milei and Argentina is something which David mentions in his piece, which still baffles me to this day. It is how a guy who is on the radical end of freedom can manage to have such a popular agenda in the country and even win an election, when us on on the other side of the world, across the Atlantic, in this country, are sort of struggling to do the same thing, or our ideas on this side of the world are not as appealing as they are in Argentina or on that side of the world. And what I really want to figure out is, where could we possibly be going wrong? Are we marketing our ideas effectively? You know, are people buying into the things that we're advocating for? All these things we write about, from limited government to private property, etc. Is it the kind of system we're operating in, maybe the culture, the political culture of the country, you know? But what is it exactly that is making it difficult for us on this part of the world to be able to succeed politically, as others are doing on the other side of the world? I think that is something I found very interesting, which David mentioned in the article. And one of the things that he mentions is that even Milei said this. It's that there is this maybe degree of hesitancy on our end at times to involve ourselves politically and to throw our hats to contest politically. Milei calls us cowards, or he says people who aren't willing to do that but want to criticize are cowards. But there is this degree of hesitancy on our end. I even see this in the institutions of learning, you know, where when it comes to things like student politics, there is hesitancy. And the consequence of that, which David points out, is that you leave a vacuum, or you leave the terrain open for your nationalist friends and your socialist friends to come in, you know, and that also creates a problem in the long term, and in the kinds of policies that we end up having in government, and the kind of shape and form that government takes. So I think really, in addition to what I've said about it being good for his momentum and boosting him, and his reform agenda, and how this shows that his reform agenda does have a mandate. I think what I'm more interested in is, how can we on this side of the world, what lessons can we discern from Milei and his administration in terms of being able to market our ideas? Because at the end of the day, Zakes always says this: we want to have a capitalist president as well. You know, so how can we find ourselves in that position on this side of the world? Because at some point we want to retreat from politics, you know, build families and build businesses and these sorts of things. We actually don't want to do this job. I don't like doing this job, you know. I want to be out there having fun with my family and doing things. But we are doing this work for a particular reason, because we're fighting for certain ideas. So when actually can we start to see these results in practice, as opposed to just doing the work we do, which is important, but when can we actually start seeing these ideas being implemented in government, and how can we get to that point?
Yeah, well said. Important points. Zex?
Yeah. Hey man, like I'm just happy that Milei won, right? Afuera indeed. Like you have no idea. I generally get pretty like yeah, as I was talking earlier on, melancholic. So this is a very nice thing to end on, because now we get to talk about victories that were had in Argentina. It's amazing. It's amazing what the Argentinian people voted for. But yeah, no, I'm sorry, I was reading a comment there. But yeah, it is very nice to see what the Argentinian people voted for, right? Because they also they come from a much more stricter left, you know, tradition. They voted for outright people who proclaimed themselves as socialists for a very, very long time. And they kept on voting them into power. So to see this shift, right? Voting a president who is like can be considered not like, you know, social democrat, but on the righter side of the social democrats, right? I'm sure there are plenty of others who'd be like, no, he's not libertarian enough, but he's more libertarian than the social democrats would be, and to me, that is always better. So to see people voting for that, man, I like that. I like that. It makes me very happy. It makes everything that we stand for at least seem worthwhile, right? And to Ayanda's point, really, which really should hopefully cut on the comment, right? And on a much more spicier note, because I love comments that speak of determinism, but it's couched in like different forms. Because the comment says that, you know, the only reason the difference is, you know, a different in demographics, and I'm sure a demographic is a synonym for something else that the commenter is not comfortable saying. But I appreciate it though. It is true though there's a difference in demographics. But then, like, you see this difference in demographics, is it a determining factor in how people will take certain choices or decisions, right? Argentinians voted for socialists for a very long time. South Africans in the past 24 years they've had democratic rule have not voted for socialists, at least outright socialists, as much as the Argentinians did. They voted for social democrats. I think the ANC will call themselves social democrats. I call them socialists in most parts, but social democrats won't admit to being socialists in disguise. But so there's that. There were like the comment itself does not account for for the fact, and of course it's not a symptom, it is a reality. So I'm sure, as I said, there is a difference, but then the implication that the difference in demographics does then translates to certain actions being able to be taken whilst others aren't is not borne true by reality for the facts that I have stated here. But to Ayanda's point really is that how do we get there, right? I think he mentions something that's pretty important, right? It is, I guess, getting involved in the political arena. Was it Socrates, or I don't know, one of these old Greek philosophers who said that when smart men don't interest themselves in ruling, then they are ruled by dumb men. I think something along those lines. I am definitely butchering that quote, but I think that's the essence of it. So I think that is really the problem, right? For instance, like when I was first getting into the libertarian movement, I remember something that was called the ZACP, right? The South African Capitalist Party. I believed in those dudes because they represented everything that I wanted to do. I wanted to stand for, but yeah, unfortunately, it died at untimely death. I would like to think of, if you can only think of all the momentum had, we just kept it going. At that time, probably would have gotten a few awards here and there. All these people who are looking for, political alternatives. So things like that, right? Like, and now really, they were the only party, and probably was the only party that were to the right of even the so-called liberal parties, right? Because as you saw, the liberal parties are like SDG people, and that is the best option we have, right? Like, these are people who wanna shove the UN's SDGs down our throats. So yeah, I don't things don't look good. But I guess you have to contest, as I said, the political arena for those like maybe join said liberal party, vote in their elections, in their policy elections, and actually vote for whatever policy you want to see represented by that party. I think really the most practical thing to do would be that, if you believe in these things. I, of course, subscribe to some of what Ayanda spoke about and Ayn Rand's view, right, of saying that uh, there is no such thing, that I want to live in a world that is whereby people don't worry about government, right? Like, I want to live in a world where the average person on the street, I've told this, right, and that the average person on the street should not know who the president is, and it should not have an impact on their life whatsoever. Right. In the same sense, if you go to a rural area and you ask them who administers it here, and they'll tell you, no, the man of the house administers it here. I'm like, yes, I want a world like that. I want a world like that. So yeah, we can only get there really by doing the work, right? In different facets. In South Africa, we're pretty fortunate enough. We still have somewhat of a constitutional order that's respected. So you have another avenue to pursue fighting for these ideals, at least by making reasonable arguments before an adjudicator and hoping that they land on the side of liberty and interpret the existing mechanisms that we do have to safeguard it on the side of liberty. So, there's that too. There are a lot of avenues. I wouldn't go as far as Milei does, because Milei is fiery and call people cowards, right? But it does have an element of cowardice somewhat. I just think that, it depends on your context. Depends on your context. When you've had multiple decades of Peronists, then your options are limited. You only have the political route, and I'm glad that it worked out. This is the whole point. It is like, I'm happy, man. I'm happy that there's a libertarian president somewhere in the world.
No, absolutely, and David makes this point as well. Like, and there's like some people who say, "Oh, why do you care? Like, we have big problems in South Africa. Why do you care about what's happening in Argentina or in the US or whatever?" But actually, it does matter, because these things reflect on the values that Milei represents, or if it's you like another politician, it reflects. So we will always, and we must always say, listen, we tried your ideas in the Soviet Union. We'll tell this to the EFF and so on. We've tried it. It's done. We tried it. We gave it a good old kind of investment, and it completely backfired. Like you even had real estate capacity there, and it was still a complete pig's breakfast. So these things matter, and then we can point to Margaret Thatcher and say that okay, so she did some of it, and to the extent that she did some of it, it worked to that extent. And Reagan did some of it, and it worked. Milei is doing it in a very real way, and that is important to us to say that actually, look, it works. So let me just kind of add a proviso there. Some things are not always going to work out in the most ideal fashion imaginable. Like there's going to be job losses, there's going to be economic contraction, there's going to be recessions if you follow a market liberal policy program. You're going to have economic contraction in a massive way because you have to cut government spending. And some absolute geniuses, and I say that with the highest degree of sarcasm that you can imagine, some absolute geniuses decided at some point that you measure economic growth and GDP in a country by adding government spending. That is such a brilliant thing that I don't know what these people were thinking. But yes, if you have a real capitalist, a real libertarian who wants to save a country from doom, he is going to have to cut government spending in a very real way, and that is going to lead to -5, -10, -15% economic growth. And everyone is going to say, what a disaster this is. No, it's necessary. So that just understand that proviso. Like the number isn't always just gonna go up, but if you understand what is in fact happening, you should support it in not even in the long term, but at least in the medium term, things are going to start getting better. Like in Argentina, where insane hyperinflation of 200% has been brought down to something like 30% now. And I mean that the proof is ultimately going to be in the pudding if Malay is given a fair chance, which it now seems he is being given a fair chance to see his agenda through. But on that point about the cowardice, I think this is the key thing that we need to discuss. Maybe not in any detail in this episode because we're almost going to run out of time, but certainly in the future we have to get into this, and that is about liberal cowardice, about libertarian cowardice. I mean that is putting it quite strongly, but I think there is something to be said for we as libertarians and as liberals, we prefer being in the academy. We prefer ruminating on ideas and sticking to that, and that's very important. I think we haven't kind of done the idea job. We haven't completed that yet, so it has to be done. But when it comes to the people that we send into politics, or the people who say that they're part of us and they go into politics, of which there are a lot, this issue of cowardice is massive. It's huge. And I mean, I always kind of hate on the DA, but let me shift over to the Freedom Front Plus a little bit. They sent out. So these guys they're federalists, they're small government, they're free market capitalists. They sent out a not a press release, a newsletter this morning, and I received their newsletters. And the last article there is them celebrating, like the DA is celebrating, and like everyone else is celebrating, that Panyaza Lesufi's Ama Panyaza is being dismantled. And they're very clear. They say that, the constitution is very clear that there's only one police force in South Africa. That's the South African Police Service. And the fact that the premier of a province had the audacity to go and create his own police force so brazenly illegally, it's good that this is now being brought to an end and heads must roll. And I read that and I was like, what in God's name are you people doing? Seriously. Like, you don't have to like Ama Panyaza. I despise Panyaza Lesufi. I think he is one of the worst actors in South African politics. I think he should have been impeached or removed through a vote of no confidence like years ago when he was still MEC for education. Like, this guy has no place in our politics. I despise everything that he stands for. The one good thing that he did, the one singular good thing that he did was tell the SACP, the SASPS, go fuck yourselves. I am establishing my own police force in Gauteng. That is the right posture. because violent crime in South Africa is, I mean, it's a crisis with few parallels anywhere else on the planet. Like these levels of violent crime, like you will find it virtually nowhere else on planet Earth or throughout history, I would say. Like there's something really wrong here. So establishing a police force and doing it well, and we can quibble about whether Panyaza did it well or not. He probably did it in the most retarded way imaginable. But the fact is, his posture, his political mentality was the right one. We want a police force, a provincial police force in Gauteng, and hey presto, here it is. We're establishing a political police force, a provincial police force. That is the right thing to do. That is what I have been encouraging, and what the Free Market Foundation has been encouraging the Western Cape to do. To say, listen, let's deal with violent crime in the Cape Flats, the most violent part of the country, in the most violent country on the planet. We're just going to deal with this issue. We're going to establish a provincial police force. And they've done some of that. Credit where it's due, they've done some of that. But we are always saying, do more, do more, do more. And now we had a precedent in Gauteng by Lesufi, and he's being condemned by Mkwanazi, by the DA, by the Freedom Front Plus. And it's just like, guys, this is what I think Milei has in mind when he speaks about cowardice amongst liberal politics. Like our enemies don't have the same cowardice. Panyaza Lesufi is a thoroughbred kind of radical socialist. Like he has no qualms about establishing an illegal police force. The EFF, I mean, they charged Ramaphosa on the stage. These guys charged the president on the stage. Can you even imagine someone from the DA doing that, or Freedom Front doing that? I don't want them specifically to charge the president on stage, but it shows that there is a difference in posture, in mentality. The DA, the second they got into power, and the second the Freedom Front Plus got into power, they said, oh, we can't cut. You people just want us to cut, and slash and cut and slash. We can't do that. No, cowards. How dare you? How dare you? This can be done. And even if you're not allowed to do it, hey, you should try anyway. And even if you fail when you've tried, you can say that, hey, we tried. We have adopted a new political mentality. We have adopted a new posture vis-a-vis our politics. And that is that we are done being cowards. We're going to get rid of this silly notion of pragmatism. We're these pragmatists. We just want to get things done, whatever those things might be. No. We have a real agenda of reform, of freedom, of federalism, of opportunity for ordinary South Africans, and we will, like a tank or a bulldozer, plummet forth on that agenda. And you must stand in our way, and we will try to get you out of our way. And sometimes you might stop us. Then we'll regroup and find a different way to get there. Machiavellianism. That is what I think Javier Milei has in mind. He's an ideologue. He calls himself an anarcho-capitalist. Like he believes in abolishing the state per se. Like he's the president of a country who believes in abolishing the state per se. So he doesn't hide behind silly pragmatisms and kind of expediencies of, oh my lord, I can't say that, whatever. No, he's clear about what he wants to do. La Libertad Avanza is clear about what they want to do. And it didn't immediately lead to them being democratically eviscerated. Actually, I think, with all the points about demographics and context, I accept all of those points. I think you have to address yourself to the political context that you live in, and that includes matters of culture, of kind of demographic voting patterns. That's all relevant. I don't think, even with that in mind, that your average South African is terribly impressed if you say, ha, you know what? We complied with Section 462B sub 2 of the Municipal Finance Act. Look at how bloody impressive we are. Wow, geez. Yeah, that's gonna win you an election. No one cares. Really, nobody cares. Other than your PR analysts, your publicity consultants, nobody cares. You will be rewarded if you can show results. You will be rewarded if you can show backbone. That is the shift in mentality and in posture that I think needs to happen. I'm not saying anything about what is legally possible just yet. That has to be determined. That has to be investigated, not just with reference to the Constitution or what the courts say, but also with reference to realpolitik. Believe it or not, sometimes you can do things that are on paper illegal that will be allowed. I know, it's heresy for me to even say such a thing, but this is reality. This has always been political reality, and those things have to be taken into account because your enemies take that into account. Your enemies take that into account. Despite the fact that the Expropriation Act is illegal, it was still signed into law. The enemies do that, but you don't. You, as a liberal, don't do that. Why not? What is the problem? Learn from Javier Milei. That is the key thing. Learn from Javier Milei. Learn from other liberals throughout history who have made political success. Understand that not everything is just about you showing everyone how good of a head boy you are in school. Like, it goes beyond that. Guys, our time is almost up, but I'll give both of you a last word on this. Ayanda?
Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. For that detailed argument that you made there. But to my last 2 points. First one about the gambling thing. I think we mentioned this earlier on. Really, the gambling industry, again, I want to reiterate, does not bear responsibility for the problem. And if we're going to accept that absurd logic, we have to necessarily accept it everywhere else, and we really can't. So, what we're dealing with here, I would argue, is something which is symptomatic of a deeper crisis. But also, the other aspect of the argument is it's just agency and really people needing to be held responsible for their own actions. So the second part about Javier Milei and him winning the election in Argentina and everything, one of the common criticisms that I often hear being leveled about him, which you touched on now, is that he's somehow an ideologue and he's dogmatic and everything. And I find it very hypocritical because the same people who are saying he's dogmatic are dogmatic themselves. I mean, they would never compromise on their own values, not on any day, never. For them, they are intent on pushing through their own agenda, which is based on their own values. So what you do touch on is this hypocrisy that I pick on at times in circles where there's an expectation on some of us to compromise on our own values, but others aren't willing to compromise on their own values. They're willing to go all the way. I mean, if you look at all the pieces of legislation that have been pushed through in the past year or so, whether it was NHI, Bella, or expropriation, those are clear pieces of legislation that are grounded in a particular worldview. There's no compromise in terms of what people want to do. So I think I am fully behind Milei. I think all of us are fully behind Milei because he's willing to go against the grain, and to push through those kinds of reforms that are the reason why the economy in Argentina has really picked up in recent years and done so well. There have been serious gains. So really, I think my point on the Malay thing is that we must not cower down when it comes to these discussions. We must assert our values and be unashamed of championing what we stand for, because there are people today who are unashamed of championing what they stand for. They would want you to believe that the kinds of regimes we saw in Russia or China, were not true representations of communism, and when we as communism advocates for the abolition of private property. So people aren't going to relinquish their property, and when you try to confiscate it, they resist, and then you go and you kill them and you shoot them, as Stalin unleashed violence on the kulaks. So this idea that those states are somehow, not representative of those ideas is false. But the point I'm making is those people are willing to push through their ideas, and we must be prepared to equally do the same.
Very well said. Jake?
Yeah. Nah, I think your men have covered it both. Vices are not crimes in the first instance, so don't try to regulate them. The state should only be concerned with crimes, really. That's the thing, really, with gambling. And then the latter part is I'm really just genuinely happy. I don't want to end on a note of say, no, people suck. No, people can take good decisions sometimes, or at least decisions I agree with. Let me say that, which are good, of course. But yeah, and I think you both covered that, right? Like I'm like it's easy. Talk is easy. That's what I'll say. I think that the practical implementation of it is what is interesting, because politics is a game of popularity, and as Milei was finding out, sometimes being popular cannot work in your instance, or sometimes it does, as it did in the recent midterms. That's why we are happy. Shout out to Donald Trump for the nice stimulus of 40 billion US. I'm sure it helped a great deal. But there are still problems too, right? That he has to deal with. And I was waiting for this midterm for me personally to really get into the meat, because I know a whole lot of people who I trust their opinions when it comes to libertarianism, who have a bit of problems with Milei. But I'm like, maybe it's just libertarians being their usual self of fighting among themselves. There'll always be that. But yeah, man, I'm a huge admirer of the current president of Argentina. As I said, he's an anarcho-capitalist. I think I might be the only anarcho-capitalist here on the pod, surrounded by two statists, minarchists, or whatever they may call themselves, these socialists around me. But yeah, I'm a huge admirer of Mr. Milei. I hope he finds success. He continues to find success, and I hope really the people of Argentina, their lives, that is the most important thing. I really hope their lives start getting better, and with the inflation rate, at least they seem to be going that way. And yeah, really, that's it for me.
Thanks a lot, Zach. I think that's a good note to end it on. Once we establish a minimal state, we'll work with you anarcho-capitalists until that point, and then we'll send you all to prison, and we'll carry on living in liberty and freedom under a minimal state. So yes, thanks for that. That is, I think, a very positive note for liberalism in the world today. It could still go horribly wrong, but for now, I think it's a good news story for us, and we must embrace it. And wherever possible, international liberalism has to offer Milei and his government assistance where necessary. And hopefully that model can start being exported. Just getting real libertarians, real liberals elected and into power through other means potentially as well sometimes. That is what we hope to see, and I think I'm almost speechless about it, because it's always been Reagan and Thatcher. It's always been 40 years ago. That's when we had our moment. To really be in the midst of it now is really an immense privilege, I think, for me. And I think we'll see. If I leave my cynicism for a moment, I think we'll see more of this in the next few years, just given the kind of the push that we've seen from Argentina and to some degree from the US, although it's a lot more tainted in the US, I think. But that's it from us this week on the Rational Standard. We hope you enjoyed this episode. To those who have joined us live, and certainly those who will watch it only a bit later, we really appreciate it. Please leave a like if you want to see more content like this. Please subscribe specifically to our channel on YouTube so that you can see more of our content in particular. Rational Standard is primarily a Substack platform with written content, so please go over to our website, rationalstandard.com, and restack those articles. It'll be the same type of thing that you hear discussed on the podcast. So for those of you who prefer reading, please go there and restack and share and like that content as well. And we will be back, or some of us will be back, or a whole other slate of people will be back on this podcast next week, same time, same place. 12 noon Friday, and we will see you then. But until then, enjoy your weekends and cheerio.